there are 2 million people on legacy benefits who did not receive an additional £20 like people on universal credit. It seems to me that lots of people on those legacy benefits have been in really bad situations, and it hasn't really been picked up by the government or Labour's front bench. Should Labour not be speaking up more on behalf of people who are so vulnerable and unable to do much about their situation?
Yeah, I think we've all got to. I was tweeting it out over the last couple of weeks, but this has been ongoing. Remember when we welcomed the £20 on top of universal credit, but to be honest, it's pretty. The 20 quid on top of UC is pretty pathetic anyway. It doesn't give a, you can't survive on that money. But then what happened was they did absolutely nothing on legacy benefits, and we did call them out. And I think all of us, to be honest, if we weren't in lockdown now, DPAC, I'd be with DPAC and we'd be out in the streets. To be honest, we'd be mobilising on the streets themselves, because it's not just about, it isn't just, it's legacy benefits overall, but the people that hurts the most are basically disabled people. It's as simple as that. And what we've found is, and I don't know whether you saw the statistics 2 weeks ago, the UN rapporteur came here, 18 months ago, Paul, I can't remember, maybe 2 years, and said now we were facing disabled people who were facing abuse of their human rights. And at the same time, they were facing no longer just poverty, but destitution. Now, 2 weeks ago, we saw statistics being rolled out whereby destitution, not just poverty, destitution in this country has now doubled over the last period. And you look at the figures behind that, and you'll see there's a vast majority of those people will be disabled people, often as well, to be frank, families with disabled children as well who are not coping. So this, to be honest, this is a disgrace. This is something we've all got to be angry about. It was interesting, when I was tweeting out in support last week, and I thought the campaign was great, by the way, the people who were campaigning around it. When I was tweeting out in support, what I was surprised at is how so few understood the issue around the legacy benefits, and how what the government were trying to do is push everyone onto universal credit. And everyone, the resistance to that is because universal credit, anyway, you're waiting 5 weeks before you get anything. So this is a big issue, and I'm hoping the Labour front bench do shout a bit more, but I think we should all be mobilising now. As I say, if we were in different circumstances, we would be mobilising, we'd be on the streets, we'd be demonstrating. And if you look at some of the best campaigns that have been waged over the last 7 or 8 years longer, have been from DPAC, and they've been direct action campaigns. We had that success over Atos. We had the success in terms of actually, I think, transforming some of the discussions around this particular issue in terms of Labour Party policy as well. And we've got to maintain that momentum, pardon the pun. We've just got to keep on going at it. But on the universal credit issue, can I just come on to that as well? Because what's got to me a little bit last week is lots of people have been saying, oh, Rishi Sunak is introducing John McDonnell's policies. No, he's not. Stop saying that. He's simply, what he's doing, he's nicking the language. He's using the rhetoric, but not the substance. So there is no way we would have a £20 increase in universal credit and at the end of September cut it off at a cliff edge. We'd be reforming the whole system so people got a minimum income guarantee. And that would then enable us to pilot universal basic income. So all these ideas that, Rishi Sunak is Nick John McDonnell's ideas. On furlough, we proposed furlough, but he introduced a scheme which goes nowhere near effectively protecting people. And then you have, 3 million people excluded altogether. So I think what we've got to do is be absolutely blunt about just how bad this last budget was. And if you look at it, it's the same old Tories. What's happened is that they say they're going to increase taxes, corporation tax in a couple of years' time. No one believes that. No one believes that. The electoral cycle will kick in, and they'll call an election before they have to increase those taxes. But in addition to that, look at how much they've given away in tax reliefs. It swamps what they're taking in corporation tax. And what they're doing is they're giving a bung to their mates again. Do you know that even in the budget, it wasn't really picked up. I tried to get it on some of the interviews I did. They're even reviewing the banking surcharge that was introduced to try and get the banks to pay for a little bit of the damage that they caused in the banking crash. They're even reviewing that. And when they say review, they'll most probably scrap it. I think it's a disgrace. And then, you know, then they come out with the 1% pay rise for nurses. Let's be absolutely clear on that. Now, Keir was right to call it an insult. It is a disgrace, but let's be clear. You know, as far as I'm concerned, if the pay claim is 12% or 15 or whatever it is, I know we've got a range of views from different unions, pay it. Just pay it. That's what we need. We need the nurses and the health staff, NHS staff, have had over a decade in which their pay has been capped or frozen. What they need is a pay rise now that actually, and it is all staff, it's all NHS staff, and actually is across the public sector as well. It means they need a pay rise to try and help them catch up on what they've lost. And if, you know, when it comes down to it, you know, what public sector workers, no one wants to go on strike and no one wants to leave their patients or anything like that. But I tell you, if it comes to a strike action, I'll be on those picket lines. We've got to back them 100%. I just think this government thinks that the NHS unions are the miners of the 1980s. I think they're taking them on deliberately. I don't think this is a naive act. I think they want to take the NHS unions on to try and smash them. That's what this is partly about. And that's why we've got to stand behind them, 100%. No doubt, no hesitation, just get behind them.
Yeah, well, I mean, the 1% of the nurses was on the front page of the papers today. But we decided to hold this discussion because I don't think the issue of the legacy benefits has been making the papers at all.
I don't think there's been any coverage of it, Crispin. That's why it's important you have this discussion.
So
if you look at what we need to do now is, I think, get the message back. Look at what DPAC and others have been saying about the implications at the moment for disabled people. We've got the situation where the people who are living in the most poverty are people with disabilities. It's as simple as that. And the reason they're living in poverty is because I think when the Tories introduced austerity, they thought that it'd be easy to cut benefits to disabled people, full stop. And they never thought there'd be any resistance. And that's what they've done. And the one thing that's been the sort of shining light in the darkness of all of this has been the campaigning that DPAC has organised. And what we've got to do now, any socialist or progressive, whatever you call yourself, we've got to get behind DPAC and disabled people campaigning. And we've got to expose it, use every platform we possibly can. We've been tweeting out, that's fine, use social media as best we can. But I think also go back into our trade union, Labour Party branches, or every organisation, start raising it in civil society organisations that we're members of, whether it's a tenants group or something like that, and start raising it and explaining to people what this means. It means people living in poverty. And I have to say as well, Paula will tell you, over the years, also tragically, we've lost a number of our members, you know, either through ill health and because they haven't had the money to really look after themselves, or the stress and mental health that ill health it's caused. And we have had suicides as a result of the terrible deprivation that disabled people have been forced into, and it just makes me so angry, really.
Yeah. Well, I'll bring Paula on now. Paula, are you there?
Yeah. Good morning, Crispin. Hello, everybody.
Thanks for coming on.
No, not a problem. First of all, right, NHS pay rise now. Right, it's so important. I mean, disabled people use the NHS every day, and it is of vital importance that, you know, our NHS staff and our nurses are given that, you know, the pay rise that they deserve. They deserve a 15% pay rise. CLAPS are not going to do it, and they really do need support. I mean, I was in A&E with my partner only yesterday, and what I saw actually broke my heart. You know, what's happening to our NHS due to this Tory government is an absolute travesty, and it's absolutely abhorrent. And we do need to campaign all the harder right across the left to fight for our NHS, and also wake up the wider public to what's going on to the privatisation by stealth. And I think that's really important. And I think hidden in the budget only this week was the dreadful £30 billion worth of cuts to health and social care budgets. and you're going to be seeing the integrated care system come in April. But you know what this hidden cut in the budget means for disabled people. It's going to be putting our health and safety at risk, and that is a huge concern, not only to us, but I think it needs to be a concern for everyone. We all use the NHS. I want to just say thank you to everybody who supported our 20 More for All campaign and increased for legacy benefits on the 1st of March. We timed this campaign to raise awareness of what disabled people have been going through, not just for the pandemic, but for many years, who've had benefits frozen for years or pennies increases, and the cost of living has risen dramatically and has left disabled people in dire poverty. And we collected, and thanks to Jen from Sheffield and Ben Clement, who organised the testimonies that disabled people sent in of the dreadful stories that of the suffering and poverty that they're experiencing, making the stark choices between heating or eating, paying for basic living costs during the pandemic, you know, afford to pay the online delivery costs, and the supermarkets use the pandemic as a way to increase their delivery costs. And also, you know, a lot of disabled people unable to get online delivery slots when shielding as well. I think that is really important to stress. And we had some, you know, a lot of support from, you know, I want to thank Unite Community, obviously Steve Turner, who's on the chat, who did a video, John, who's always been a great support to DPAC, Debbie Abrahams, Kate Osborne, Jonathan Reynolds did a video, and I'm sure Jen will pick up on, and Marsha D. Cordova, Vicky Foxcroft sent a message of solidarity as well. And obviously the British gas striking workers on the picket line down the road from me in Sidcup sent a message of solidarity and stood out there with messages as well, which really meant a great deal to us. But I think really, you know, disabled people have been overlooked and ignored for way too long. And Martin Lewis did an interview with Rishi Sunak straight after the budget, and his message was really clear. There is no increase for disabled people. What he's doing is making a two-tier benefit system. So the £20 uplift for universal credit is for low-income workers who are also being treated horrendously, let's be clear. But there is nothing for disabled people. So if you're not working, you know, you're worth nothing. You know, if you're a disabled person, you're expendable. And I think that's really important to stress. So it's really important that we continue the fight for the 20 More for All campaign and the increase for legacy benefits, because disabled people are, you know, they're going without. They've been going hungry during the pandemic. They've been going cold during the pandemic, and they've been forgotten during the pandemic. And it's important that when we're out on the street again, and we will be, that, you know, you join our, not only your voice to ours, but you support us out on the street physically, because the more people are out there, the more they're forced to take action. And where we also had a very, I want to thank, you know, we had a very great action on Monday where we delivered messages to Rishi Sunak and Theresa Coffey and to Boris Johnson, and we left wheelchairs with messages and obviously the testimonies. But some of those messages were empty cup of soup packets, because, you know, disabled people can't afford to eat pay for nutritious food, incontinence pads because they haven't been able to get the equipment and medications during the pandemic. I think that's really important to stress. And the Treasury absolutely panicked when the delivery driver turned up. He went, DPAC's outside, quick, you know, shut the doors and man the barricades. Well, here's a message to Rishi Sunak, and are you listening? Are you listening, Boris Johnson, Theresa Coffey? You'll never know when we're going to be there, but expect us to be out there. And I can promise you this, where there's no justice for us, there's going to be no peace for you, right? And we'll be out there on the street, and we're going to be taking a fight to you when we're able to. I promise you that. And I think, you know, also it's important to stress during the pandemic that 60% of deaths from coronavirus have been that of disabled people. and you've had, you know, 1.5 million disabled, older disabled people left to rot in care homes, and you know, you've seen an awful lot of care home deaths and everything, people being discharged back into hospitals, back into care homes. And also, you know, disabled people with learning disabilities and autism, thousands of them have had do not resuscitate placed on their records without their authorization and that of their families. Disabled people left with, you know, no NHS care during the pandemic and everything, and which has caused further distress and also worsening of their conditions. But, you know, MPs are saying to disabled people, transfer to universal credit. Well, I'm sorry, but, you know, you transfer to universal credit as a disabled person, you know, you're going to lose your disability premiums, and that's over £2,000 income, which further increases our poverty and distress. And there were some MPs who were saying, oh, because we've been shielding during the pandemic, we must have saved a lot of money. Well, sorry, but no, that's not the case. As the reasons I've already stated, we've had further increases in living costs and extra costs to meet for personal protective equipment for not only ourselves but our carers to meet from our legacy benefits. And it's important to stress that there was no mention of social care during the budget either. We've seen 8 billion wiped off social care since 2010, and we've seen an awful lot of you know, local authorities who are strapped for cash during the last 10 years have had to hike social care costs for disabled people, which means many disabled people are having to pay social care costs of up to £100 per week, which means that the benefit they've been getting from personal independence payments and attendance allowance has been literally wiped out and leaving them unable to eat because they're having to pay for social care. And you know, we're fighting for a national independent living service because disabled people are barely existing. There was no mention in the budget for, you know, a national social care service. Rishi Sunak just didn't mention social care, didn't mention legacy benefits. All he cared, you know, there was no mention of us because we were forgotten, we were ignored, and we are expendable. And I think, you know, we need to make sure now that we pile pressure on not only the government but on Labour and saying, look, we're here, hear our voices, but we need the wider left to include us in discussions, because all the campaigns impact on one another. They all impact on disabled people, including the NHS, including education, including, you know, work and everything else. We need our voices to be heard more than they are. But please, when we're back out on the street, we don't just need messages of solidarity online. We need you out on the street with us in solidarity, building a mass resistance movement and saying to this government, you've got blood on your hands. But also on the day of the budget, and it's really important to say this, that Errol Graham, whose family took the DWP to court because he died after his benefits were stopped, and he was found by bailiffs on the floor with letters, and he was under 5 stone when he died. That court case was lost. And it's really important to stress that thousands of disabled people who are enduring work capability assessments and personal independence payment assessments during the pandemic are losing their support on top of everything else. And we remember every disabled person who has died not only during the pandemic but the last 10 years of austerity. They're etched in our hearts and minds. And a message to this government: you have violated our human rights, you've caused a human catastrophe on disabled people's lives, but you have blood on your hands from the deaths of disabled people, and we won't rest until we see you in the dock facing the justice for every death, for every person you've put in poverty, and we will never stop resisting and fighting back. But please join our campaign and support us. Solidarity, or I'm sure Jen will fill in on what I've missed. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Paula. John, just quickly, John, I know you've got to get off, so I just thought thank you again for coming on. I'm going to bring on Steve Turner, who's kindly waited to speak. Are you there, Steve?
Yeah, I'm here. Hi, Crispin.
So Unite Community have been campaigning with DPAC on this. Can you tell us how we can support that campaign and what you've been doing?
Yeah, of course I can. Look, thanks very much for this, Crispin, and everyone behind the scenes that makes this happen, by the way. It's an incredibly important discussion. I just want to pay tribute first off to Paula, DPAC, all of those that are out there building that mobilisation for economic and political justice and against the attacks on disabled people in particular. I mean, we work very closely with DPAC. We have for a long, long time now. We fought against universal credit since its first conception over 8 years ago by the honourable Ian Duncan Smith, of course. And our Unite community members, of which Paula is a very proud one, have been out on the streets with DPAC, the People's Assembly, all of those community organisations that have built up a real confident mobilising force, actually, to take on the government and work against those local authorities as well that are failing to provide that local level support that's so desperately needed, not just during the COVID pandemic, of course, but has been neglected for decades now. And we've had a whole series of national days of action. And I know it's been really difficult during the pandemic to get on the streets and mobilise and do those things that we do best. I mean, I've been on demonstrations with Paula and others where they've chained themselves to railings outside Westminster, picking up on some of those, really historical, fantastic events that the suffragettes used to wage when they were fighting for the right to vote, of course. Direct political actions, conscious actions against a government that's taken a deliberate, conscious political choice to exclude from that miserable £20, because it is a miserable £20. John raised the point about £20 is not enough. In fact, the whole system should be scrapped and replaced with a system of social solidarity and not this welfare state that the Tories like to demonise the worthy and the unworthy within. But that's a much bigger issue, of course. But we've been out there fighting for social and economic justice for the 2.2 million people that have been excluded from that £20 payment, 1.9 million of them of whom are disabled. And that, as I said, was a political choice. This is the 5th richest nation on our planet. So let's not fall for some con trick that we can't afford to pay those that are the most vulnerable within society an amount of money that allows them to live with dignity, or we can't home our homeless, or we can't alleviate the need for food banks or clothing banks across our society. It's quite disgraceful, Crispin, that we see 14 million people in poverty. So I don't see about universal credit, but it's much bigger than universal credit in reality. We've got 4.2 million children living in poverty in the UK in 2021. 30% of those, 30% of all children, actually, 9 children in every class of 30 are living in poverty in the UK right now. That's an obscene figure. So never be told that we can't afford to make a different political choices to end poverty. Poverty is a political choice by its very nature, and therefore you can make alternate political choices. We've got 10 million people using food banks. Paula outlined, the case for the disabled, millions there actually that are facing real destitution. As John said, the UN report spoke about destitution now, not just poverty, but destitution, being stuck in their homes, shielding during the biggest pandemic in 120 years that the globe has faced. And right now, of course, their costs are going up, whether that's heating costs or eating costs. And yet they're being left on benefits that have been squeezed and cut for 10 years via austerity program that the Tories have been rolling out. And on the other side of the equation, of course, those with money have done very nicely. So whilst people millions are losing their jobs and facing, the real threat of eviction or life on benefits, billionaires have increased their wealth by more than a quarter during the course of the pandemic. £7.8 trillion is now in the hands of billionaires. And that's obscene in modern society. And that requires us to do something very serious about it. That requires a new politics, a new economy. And that's why the previous debate, John was involved in it, and the paper review, of course, about what sort of society do we want to be is so incredibly important. What sort of new economy, new politics do we need? How do we end this attack on the poor and the vulnerable, all of our poor and vulnerable? This narrative of the worthy and the unworthy, the workers and the shirkers, that point that Rishi Sunak made, that he excluded deliberately, consciously, excluded those that weren't in work from that additional £20. How obscene is it that work doesn't pay in any event? This corporate welfare ideological position that the taxpayer can subsidise low pay, poverty wages, short hours, employers' profits, shareholder dividends. It's obscene that the state sees its role in propping up already rich corporations, millionaires and billionaires across the world, rather than supporting the most vulnerable within society. And that's what we need, Crispin, that new solidarity fund, that return to social security, not stigmatised welfare. Whether you're disabled, whether you're sick, whether you're vulnerable, whether you've been injured at work, we all rely on social solidarity at some point in our lives. Ending pensioner poverty is hugely important to us. Fuel poverty, food poverty. You know, we're in a very difficult place right now, a desperate situation for millions, Crispin. And we need a new politics, a real new economy out there. And that's that vision for a better, fairer, greener society. So, you know, I'll end with this, Chris. You know, my hats off to DPAC, to Paula, to Jennifer, who we haven't heard from yet, to all those in Labour that are standing up with us, all those that want to get back out on the streets again, build that confident class movement to start a real effective fight back and make that difference that we all know we need across our nation right now.
Thank you, Steve. Great to see you.
And you, mate.
And hope to see you again. And Jennifer, you started this discussion. If you hadn't come on the show on Wednesday and pointed out what was going on, then I wouldn't have known about it. That's not to say that it wasn't being said, but obviously the media is not talking about it. From what I've been hearing, it just seems like there's a lot of divide and rule going on here, trying to pit people who are working against people who aren't working, and then people who are disabled who are on universal credit against people who are not on universal credit. I mean, they're just playing everyone off each other, aren't they?
Are they? Are they playing people off against each other, or are they deliberately targeting disabled people only with punitive policies that are causing mass suffering and death? Is that playing people off against each other? Or is it the reality that disabled people are at the bottom, the absolute bottom of every single government policy? This is the thing. We can't trivialise it. It's not an us and them thing, because we haven't got a choice. And thank you so much to everybody who sends solidarity to DPAC and retweets things online. And the messages that Paula said earlier are so important, because we're not going anywhere. What the government have got to understand is that so many of us are at the point now, they've put us in the position that we've got nothing left to lose. Nothing left to lose. That's why disabled activists are fearless or courageous enough to chain ourselves to Westminster, to lie down in front of trucks and buses, or we'll lie down in front of tanks if they want to try that one. You know, we've got nothing left to lose. Absolutely nothing. That's the fact. And it's really, really appreciated that Laura Pidcock, John McDonnell, Marsha de Cordova, and the other MPs that Paula mentioned, and Steve Turner actually, did tweet out in support of 20 more for all. But you know what? There's 200 Labour MPs. Where was their support? And how many CLPs are there? And where was the support from all of them? These things aren't talked about in the media, but we can talk about them. And we need you to elevate our voices and talk about them too. Because there's 2.5 million people who have had no additional support during the lockdown. Everybody's talking about the 3.5 million self-employed people, and quite rightly so, because they've been treated appallingly. But what about us? What about us?